Today I'm going to show you how I create a live web preview of any image I'm editing in Photoshop. And you can download the tools I'm using for free. Hi, my name is Klaus Hermann and you can find me on troubleshooting.com, where I show you how to create and craft better photos. In this tutorial I'm going to show you my live web preview tool for Photoshop. You can download this tool for free and I will show you how to use it. Basically, this live preview tool is a small app that runs on a web page displayed in your browser. It works together with Photoshop's generator platform to display your image in common web sizes, and it updates these previews automatically as you edit your image in Photoshop. This is extremely convenient and allows you to keep track of how your edits will affect the display of your image on the web. Most of the images you edit will end up on the web one way or another, but unfortunately what you see in Photoshop while you edit is not always what you get when you eventually export your image for the web. The colors may shift, the sharpening may be off, or the image may simply not look good at a reduced size. Photoshop offers no built-in live web preview feature. Your best bet is to use the deprecated Save for Web feature and use it to open a preview manually. But that's very time-consuming and inconvenient. Let's check out how this works before I show you my own live web preview tool. In order to use Save for Web to preview your image, you have to go to File, then Export and Save for Web Legacy. Note that Adobe themselves call it legacy to indicate that it will go away at some point because, as they put it, it's much too old. The code is much too old to maintain it effectively and efficiently. So don't expect this to hang around for much longer. It will go away. But for now, you can still do this. What you see typically is this 2-up view here of the original and a JPEG version of the file that you're going to be exporting or saving for the web. And what you have to do to create a preview is, first of all, go down here to the image size and adjust the width. I'm using 800 pixels because that's typically what you see on a web page, for example, on a blog post. Then choose JPEG here. Make sure that the quality is decent, like 80% is around this, is a good value for web images. 60 to 80%, somewhere around that. Convert to sRGB is important because sRGB is effectively the color space of the web. It's what most browsers use to display your images. And then you go down here where you see the preview section, and there is a little drop-down list here. And you can click on that, and the Save for Web feature will open your image in the default browser, which happens to be Windows Explorer in my case. But you can use this edit list and other options here to select the browser of your choice. So you can use effectively any browser that you have installed on your computer. But that's basically what you get. You have to open the Save for Web window or dialog box, make your adjustments, and then click the preview button, which is quite cumbersome and inconvenient if you want to do this more than once for a single image. Now let me show you how I'm previewing my images for the web using my little web application and a set of Photoshop actions. Now those are the two parts of this application. The actions allow me to use the generator function inside Photoshop to generate those preview images. And a small app inside a web page running in the browser checks whether those images are updated and loads them automatically and displays them to me. So that's the live part of this web preview tool. And don't worry, in a minute after I've shown you how it's working, I will show you how it's done and how you can download all this stuff and set it up and use it yourself. Okay, it's totally free. You can download everything from my website. So don't worry, I'm going to explain that in a minute. But first, let me show you how it works. So I have this image open here, a few adjustment layers, a few pixel layers, and I have my action set live web preview installed already. And to start off, I am selecting the web preview action and run it. Okay, and what that does is it creates a new group inside my Photoshop file and puts all the existing layers inside that group. and this group has a specific name which you shouldn't change at all, because that name tells Photoshop which images to create for the preview, okay? And then the second part is the browser app. And let me switch to that. Here you can see the Photoshop Live Web Preview app. It's an HTML page, but it runs completely locally, and it has got some JavaScript code in it which checks for those images and checks if they're updated and then reloads them and shows them to me. So here you see the current version of the image in 3 common web sizes. We have an 800 pixel wide display for things like blog posts, for example. We have a 450 pixel wide display down here. For things like social media, that's a typical size, 400 to 500 pixels wide. And we have a thumbnail view of 150 pixels wide. So you can see how your images looks at different sizes. Using the Live Preview app is pretty simple. It doesn't have a lot of controls, only a few settings and a few functions that you can use to check before and after views of an image. Now, let me start here at the bottom where you have the settings. The first setting is the color theme, and you can choose here between different backgrounds, like white, for example, with black typeface, 2 versions of gray, and a black background. Okay, and each time you change a setting, you have to click the apply button. The next one is the refresh rate, which is given in milliseconds. So this is set to 500 milliseconds right now. And that's the interval in which the app checks for updates on those images. And the shorter you set this interval, the more snappy the whole application is. So if you set this to a low value, you don't have to wait for long for this previews to update. Now keep in mind that the generator inside Photoshop takes some time, okay? It's not a real-time thing. When you do a change, it automatically generates the images a split second later. It can take a few moments for this to do. But if you set a low refresh rate, you make sure that the browser doesn't add to that delay, okay? If you've got performance issues, so if the browser uses a lot of CPU on your machine, you can set this to 1 second or 2 seconds and still get a decent refresh rate for your previews. The next setting we have here is the timeout. And that's set to 60 seconds or a minute, which is equal to 60,000 milliseconds, obviously. And what that does is it tells the application how long to wait for an update once the images, the preview images have disappeared. Because when you change your image inside Photoshop, generator notices that and removes the old previews, the old images, and then it generates new ones. And the app will wait for this many milliseconds before it tells you that the previews are not updated anymore. So it generates a warning so that you know something may be wrong. Okay, so that's a timeout. It's typically around a minute, which is a good value for this timeout to wait. But you can set this to higher values if you get constant warnings in your case. So whenever you changed any of those settings, click apply and they will take effect. And then we go up here to the header bar, so to speak. And this section has a few buttons on it. And these buttons, well, the first one on the left, on the right is the help button, which takes you to the tutorial blog post, where you can watch the video and get help if anything is not working, for example. But those next 3 buttons, the hold, new, and close button, are essentially for creating kind of a before and after comparison in your browser. Now let me show you how this works. To stop the app running in this very page from updating, you click the hold button, okay? And the app says review is on hold. The previews will not be updated until you release the hold. And the button turns into a release button. So the app will start looking for updated images once you click the release button. Then it will start looking for images again. But once you click the hold button, it will stop and not update those images, whatever you do in Photoshop, okay? Now, if you go back to Photoshop, let me open this group here. And if you add an adjustment, let's say you add a black and white adjustment, for example, and then you go back here, you can see that nothing happens. So those images are not updated. And once you click the new button, a new instance of the web page will open, and you see the new previews here in this page. So what that allows you is to click or to swap back and forth between those two, to compare how those two versions of your image look on the web. Once you're done with your comparison, simply click the close button up here. The tab will close and you will take them back to the original instance of the app, showing you the images before you applied your adjustments in Photoshop. Okay, that's how simple it is. Now, if you go back to Photoshop, you can see that we still have this black and white image here. And so once I click the release button, the app will update the preview again, and then it will regularly check for new updates. Let me go back to Photoshop here, turn this black and white layer off. And you can see that you get this spinning icon on top of the images to indicate that a new preview is being generated, and you have to wait for a few seconds or a few moments for the update to appear. So that was a brief overview of how the app works and how you can use it. But what do you have to do to use it on your own images, on your own computer? Now let me show you what you have to do in order to get it up and running. And the good news is that you can download everything you need from the tutorial webpage on our website and from the Adobe add-on store. But the bad news kind of is that it's not a polished kind of application. It's not something that Adobe did themselves and integrated it neatly into Photoshop, which should be the way you do it, but it's rather a workaround. So it has rough edges, okay? So it may not work perfectly in every situation, but the good thing is it tells you when it's not working, okay? It will never pretend that you see previews of something that is actually not there, okay? So to make a long story short, how do you do that? How do you get that whole thing running? Now, the first thing that you need to do is to go to Photoshop and to enable the generator feature. To do that, go to the Edit menu, down to Preferences and to Plugins, and you will see at the top here this Enable Generator checkbox, and you have to ensure that this is checked. Okay, that's the default when you install Photoshop for the first time, but nevertheless go in there and check if this check mark is there. Once that's done, there is another thing you should do, and that is to download the Generator Config tool. Okay, so that's another thing that's not quite where it should be in terms of the things that Adobe does and Photoshop does. You cannot really configure the generator in the way that it's supposed to be configurable. You need to install an add-on to enable that. So here's how you do it. You go to the tutorial webpage, which you will find a link for in this tutorial, and down to the Downloads and Resources section. And the third link that you see here is the Generator Config add-on. If you click on that, you'll be taken to Adobe's add-on page, and I have already installed the add-on, obviously, but if you have not installed it, this button here is green and it says free, and you just press that button, and then the web page sends a message to your Creative Cloud, a subscription in the background at Adobe servers, and that communicates with your Creative Cloud desktop application. And that application then installs the extension for you, or the add-on for you. It may be that you need to restart Photoshop in order for the extension to show up in the end, but that's how it works. Make sure that you're signed in, or if you click the green free button that will appear in your case, you're going to be taken to a login screen if you're not already logged in. Okay, so you have to log in into the Adobe Creative Cloud to install the extension. Once that's done, you can go to back to Photoshop, to Window and Extensions, and there you will see the Generator Configuration item here. And you can click on that, and it will take you to this panel here, which are the configuration options of the generator. Now, you can pretty much leave everything in here at the default value except for this Color Convert Pixels down here. That should be checked, because that enables, or that makes sure that Photoshop will apply your current image mode in Photoshop, so the color profile that you're using, before it exports the image out. Okay, if you don't do that, it could be that another color profile that was carried over from applications like Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw could apply and the web preview could look differently. Okay, so that's an important checkbox here. The other things are either not applicable to many things that you're doing, or you have to experiment with them, like with the interpolation method here. You also have this in the Save for Web dialog box. And it's always best and safest to leave this at the default value. But that's how you influence the way the generator creates your preview images. The second thing that you need to do in order to get this whole thing running is to again go to the tutorial web page. And we have to go back to the original web page here. And in the Downloads and Resources section, you will see the Photoshop action set. Click on that action set and you will get a dialog that looks something like this. If it says open with Adobe Photoshop CC, fine, just do that. And it will automatically and immediately install those actions inside Photoshop. You can also say save file and then go to the location where you saved the actions file and double click on it, and it will also install it. Or you go to the actions panel and say load actions. I've already done this. So the actions are already in my Photoshop here. As you can see, Farbspiel Actions, Live Web Preview here. And if you're on a Mac, for example, and the double-click installation trick that I've just told you doesn't work, just simply go to Photoshop, to the Actions panel, open it by going to Window and Actions, if it's not already open. Click this little icon here at the top right, and click on Load Actions, and it will open a load dialog here, and you can choose the ATN file that you downloaded from the website. Okay, so once you've got those actions inside Photoshop, you open it up and you go to the first one here, Web Preview, and you just click this play button down here. And as I've shown you before, what that will do is it creates a new group with a specific name that instructs generator to create specific previews. And it puts all the layers that you had in your project inside that group. And that's important, okay? All that is done automatically. And you will see something like this. So at first glance, it looks like all your layers have been deleted or are gone, and that's not the case. Just open that group and there they are, everything that you've done in your Photoshop file. Now, from now on, everything that you want to have inside the preview, or that you want to affect the preview, should be added to this group. So if you add a new adjustment layer, just make sure that it's inside the group to affect the preview, okay? Now, adjustments layers actually also work when you add them outside the group, at the top here, for example. But it's always safe to just add everything you do inside that web preview group to make sure that it actually affects the preview, and that the thing that you see in Photoshop doesn't differ from the thing that you see in the browser app. The next step in preparing your web preview is to actually tell Photoshop to create those preview images for the open file. And to do that, in Photoshop, go to File and Generate, and make sure that there is a check mark in front of the Image Assets option here. And once you do this, and the file is saved, so it actually needs to be saved in some folder on your computer. But once that's done, Photoshop will actually create a subfolder in the location where your file is stored, where it generates those preview images for us. And that's how this looks. So this is the Photoshop file that you see is open here in Photoshop. And that's the folder, that's the assets folder that Photoshop creates. And when we go in here, you can see those three preview images at different sizes. Okay. Now there's the next step you already see in here, and that's this HTML page. How do you get that? Now, to get that, go back to the web page and download the preview web page that you see here. Again, click on it. A download page should open. Now, don't open it in Google Chrome. Just save it to some location, okay? Save it into this assets folder that I've just shown you. And once you've done this, the folder looks like this. And everything that's left to do is to double click on this and open it in your browser. And there's your preview, and it watches that folder with the preview images and checks whether those updates, and whenever they update, it updates its display. Now, these have been quite a few steps that you need to take in order to get this whole thing running. So let me just summarize what you need to do, okay? The first thing is to tell Photoshop to enable the generator plugin via the preferences dialog. The second thing is to download the Photoshop actions and to click on the web preview action and run that action so that everything in your Photoshop file is inside a group which tells generator to create those previews, okay? The next thing is to install the generator configuration extension. Now, we actually did this before the actions, but that's not really important. So install that add-on so that you can configure what generator actually does for you. Next, you have to enable the image assets feature for that particular image in Photoshop. And then finally, you have to download the preview HTML page to the assets folder of the image and open it in your web browser. Now, those are quite a few steps, but enabling the generator plugin has only to be done once. Installing the config add-on is only done once. The actions will be there next time you start Photoshop. So everything really you need to do for the second image that you want to preview is to run that action, enable the image assets via the files generate item here, and copy the HTML page to the new folder that's generated, and then open it in your browser, okay? You don't need to change that HTML page in any way. You can just take it from one image and copy it to the next image. Now, as I already mentioned, this is not a neat and tidy turnkey solution. It's more of a workaround. It's a hack, actually, to make this work. And therefore, there are some things that you need to pay attention to because they may not be working as you may expect it in a polished commercial product, okay? The first thing is that for some strange reason, Photoshop's generator tool sometimes gets stuck, okay? Particularly if you apply a lot of adjustments in a short amount of time, it kind of sits back and waits for you to finish those because it doesn't want to be creating new images each and every time you do something. At least that's how it appears to me. So it can be at sometimes that generator appears to be stuck, so it doesn't create new previews. The web preview app in the browser will tell you that by telling you that there's no previews, I can't load anything. So there's a warning from that side. And in order to fix this, there are a couple of things that you can do. Let me show you. Let me first get rid of this layer here. And let's assume that you're in the middle of editing your image and you have this group here which generates the previews. And the first thing, if your preview is stuck and there's no new preview generated, just execute this re-web preview action that you see up here. What that does is it eliminates the previous group, but it doesn't delete any of your layers, don't be afraid. And it creates a new group. Okay, so it reinstantiates, it reinitiates the whole process. So that can help get generator started again. The other thing is that you can save your file. That also tells generator that you're now at a certain milestone in your editing, and it may start generating those images again. To escalate that further, you may close the file and reopen it, obviously. That helps in a lot of situations. And finally, you may want to restart Photoshop altogether if anything else fails. But just check again, if everything fails, whether the image assets are still enabled, whether you have a check mark here in this generate image assets item, and whether the group is actually existing. Because maybe, for example, if you run the unweb preview, it's just gone and generator doesn't know that it has to generate anything, okay? So those are the things that you can do to get the generator unstuck and continue creating your previews. The other thing that you need to pay attention to is that cropping throws off the way that those previews are generated. Generator actually requires you to specify what region of your image is actually going to be included in the preview, and you're doing this by creating a layer mask. Now you don't need to do this normally, because I'm already creating it in those actions when you run the web preview action. Now let me quickly do this here again. And you can see that you have a layer mask, and it appears that that's only a white default layer mask, but it's not. It's actually ending at the limits, at the edges of the frame that you see here. Now, if you crop your image using the crop tool here, let me crop this in. And I'm not going to delete crop pixels. You should never delete those crop pixels, by the way. And I'm applying this. You can see that the preview doesn't really respect that new crop in many cases. Okay, now it did for some reason. But if it doesn't, you can fix this easily by just running this re-web preview action here. And once you do this, the group will be created newly, and the layer mask that is required will also be created. Okay, so if the preview doesn't reflect your current crop, if you crop your image in and the preview stays at the original crop, just run the re-web preview action to generate the whole thing anew, and it will fix the problem in most cases. So now it's your turn. Download the actions and download the HTML page and use them to create your own previews of your own images. And just tell me how you like it. If you have any suggestions, feedback, or questions, feel free to leave a comment below or on the blog post, and I'll be happy to help. In this tutorial, I've introduced you to my live web preview tool for Photoshop. It is based on Photoshop's generator platform and lets you inspect previews in 3 common web sizes. The previews are updated automatically whenever you change the image in Photoshop. After enabling the generator platform in Photoshop, we downloaded and installed the generator configuration extension to control the way in which generator creates the preview images. Then we downloaded and installed the Photoshop actions that you can use to prepare your Photoshop file for the preview. After storing the live preview HTML page in the assets subfolder, we opened it in a web browser to start the preview. Within the live web preview app, you can configure the way it displays your images and how it updates the previews. The hold and release function lets you easily compare different versions of your image as they appear in your browser. If you want more tutorials like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and sign up for our newsletter to get the latest and greatest Photoshop, Lightroom and photography tutorials straight to your inbox. That's all from me for today. See you and keep creating.